Hey guys, what is up and welcome back to my channel. I'm Ian TheJunkernaut, and today is part 2 of the DIY Kylo Ren combat lightsaber build. If you happen to miss part 1 of the build and you want to see how I made the hilt, feel free to pause this video now and click up into one of the corners, and you can follow that link and watch that one first. I'm trying to be better about keeping my promises to you guys, so if I start a build and I say, hey, I'm going to finish it later, I really want to keep those promises to you. So far, I've done it maybe like 30 to 40% of the time that I've said it, but in all honesty, I've kind of struggled with this one specifically. It's not because I had trouble with the build, but the problem is that one of my main guiding principles on this channel is trying to keep the videos and the builds entertaining and also approachable, even if you're maybe not super experienced in something. But that is kind of hard to do with electronics because they're very small, they're very fiddly, it's time consuming, and I can't really just bust right through it because, you know, the majority of people won't have any idea what I've done. So for the people who have been waiting on asking for this build, here it is. For the people who aren't as interested, don't worry, I'll have something else coming out for you pretty soon. Alright, so here is what the internals of the Hasbro Force Awakens Kylo Ren lightsaber looks like. As you can see, there's actually not that much going on. We've got 3 small LEDs, one for each of the side blades and one for the main blade here. And we have our speaker that comes back here, and we've got our battery pack. Now, I could sit here and try and pretend like I'm an expert. I'm not going to do that, but I can hopefully give you enough of the basics that you can, you know, start learning about how to do this for yourself. We've got a kind of a try-me switch on the back here. These two portions right here, one is going to be the clash sensor, and one is going to be the swing sensor. And so both of those have kind of like a little spring inside. If it hits something real suddenly, it's going to bend that spring and touch the side, and it tells the saber, hey, play the clash sound, the on-off switch right there, which we are going to have to wire to another one. You can very easily wire up a switch with a battery pack and an LED, and if you just want it to light up, it will be very, very bright, and it'll still be a ton of fun to use. But what this does is it gives us some onboard LED effects and some built-in sound with this speaker as well. We're going to need a common momentary switch for this one, a 3-watt single diode LED. This one is on kind of what they call a star, which is a bit of a heat sink and also just gives it a base for it to sit on. Different gauges and lengths of some wire, a PNP transistor. You know, depending on what you want to do, you may want to get an extra speaker. If you want it to be extra loud, you may want some battery connectors, but none of those things are super important. Something that is pretty important is some kind of a lens for your LED. So this is going to fit over the LED and focus all of the light straight up. And you may need some various resistors to make sure the voltages going to your LED are correct. You're also going to need some kind of power source, electrical tape, and or heat shrink tubing to protect your wires. Yeah, I would recommend a soldering iron. It's some way to cut and strip your wires. So the main problem that we're going to run into with this board is getting this main LED output here to put out enough voltage and current for us to be able to power our much stronger LED, because right now it will barely light it up. The way that we're going to get around this is by using a PNP transistor, which just imagine a light switch. You know, in one position it's off, it stops the current from going on. In the other position, it allows the current to go through because you've switched the light to on. But rather than a normal switch, using, you know, your hand or whatever to be the input to tell it to turn on or off, you use the third terminal to hook it up to, I believe it's the negative, it could be the positive, of something else. So it uses that electrical current as the stimulus to tell it to turn on or off. If you happen to be using a saber board that doesn't have any onboard effects for the lights, you can actually attach this into the speaker port rather than the LED, and so any kind of flickering in the speaker noise, whether it's higher or lower, or if it has a clash sound, that will actually affect the lighting up or the flicker that's on the LED itself. And so there's just different things that you can do that are pretty cool. In the past, my experience has always been that if a Hasbro board was meant to run with 4.5 volts, it could run with 6 volts or one extra battery. For now, I'm just taping this together so I don't have to worry about the wires touching anything and shorting out. Let's go ahead and take off this main LED. I'm going to use my soldering iron to melt this off because I think I already cracked it a little bit. I'm going to pre-tin the wires, which is basically putting a little solder on them before you solder them together. Dude, it's such a small area. I got distracted by the fact that I almost broke my board. It made me forget that I honestly don't even need this positive terminal up here because of the fact that we're using the PNP transistor. You only need the negative. And we'll just take off this because it's a waste of space. And we're going to go ahead and pre-tin our 3 leads. The one all the way on this side here, and we're going to solder it to the negative from the LED. The middle terminal is going to go to the positive of our LED. If you hadn't noticed yet, it's not really hard, it's just delicate. And then the remaining terminal is going to go to the positive lead of the battery pack. Plug that baby in. This negative from the LED, and then that's going to go directly back to the battery pack as well. You're not supposed to be doing that. I think I'm grounding it out when I'm touching it. That is so weird. Crosses, it will flash and turn on and all that good stuff. Yeah, it almost did. Something is not quite right. I'm pretty sure I've got some solder that's connecting these 2 tines together, so I need to clear that up. See if I can bend these a little bit. That might be super helpful.
That's what I'm talking about.
It just wasn't getting a good connection to the negative lead from the LED. Remember, if you're not an idiot like me, if you just leave this main original LED on and solder onto those terminals, you'll be way better off. Nice and bright. We've got our blade here. Definitely fairly bright, could be better, but I think it's good enough to continue onwards. There's a lot of things to think about at this factor. How do you get it out if you need to repair it? How do you, get the batteries in and out? You need to make sure that you have connectors and wires that are long enough so you can actually do the things to maintain and use the Saber. Because if you just put it together and then you slide it in there, and if you have to completely break it to get it apart again, that's kind of dumb. I'm just going to do a time lapse of all that because it's going to be different for every Saber, but you can hopefully kind of follow along. At this stage, it's really important to actually have the hilt of the Saber out with you next to where you're working, so you can constantly be checking measurements and design elements so you can make sure that all of the wires and everything are the proper lengths. If you have a wire that's too long, it's going to be more likely to get kind of caught up and crimped inside. You might end up with a short. If your wires that too short, you're just not going to be able to run things to where they need to go. Now we're getting all of the speaker wires soldered up to the correct lengths, and we're getting some heat shrink tubing put on. This is just some kind of rubbery plastic that you put over the wires, and when you apply heat, it shrinks down to about 1/3 of the size. This is really important for any of these exposed wire connections because if you have those inside of a metal tube and you try and turn it on, all these 10 hours of work and financial stuff that you put into this is basically going to become a heap of garbage. Now I'm getting ready to solder on a small battery connector to the main board. This will make it easier to take the batteries in and out, also makes it possible so I can use a rechargeable battery in the future. These are commonly used for airsoft batteries, but it just happened to be what I had. Here we're starting to get the main momentary switch wired up. One side screws into the button here, and the other side will be soldered to the button that is on the face of the board. This part is a little bit tricky, and you have to scratch up the face to make it stick well. So just a little tiny bead on there to start. If you do too much, it's just going to think it's on all the time, and the button won't work. Yeah. Here I'm putting a bit of hot glue on the board to help support the wires so they won't break off from getting moved around too much. And now we're covering it all with electrical tape to make sure that all those terminals are covered. So I believe this is an 8.5 degree lens. Come with a little base that is meant to attach onto your LED here. Generally I can't get them to actually fit on with the wires exposed, so I have to kind of sand out these edges of this opening so that it can be all the way flushed. All of a sudden my main LED shorted out. By the time I figured out what was going on, I had burned out my main LED and my backup LED and another just 1 watt red LED that I had lying around, which was basically that I was getting too much forward voltage to my LED. Partially my own fault, just misreading the specs, but also I'm a little bit skeptical that the LEDs that were shipped to me were actually 3 watts. Just trying to work with what I have until I can get the new parts in. Is a 3 watt white, but I do also have some colored pieces of plastic that you can put over the LED that'll only allow the red light through, and so that's kind of cool that we can change the color and everything. But generally, you know, if you start with a 3 watt white and then you only let the red light through, it's going to be more like a 1 watt red, you know, because it blocks so much of the light coming out. But we need some way to hold this into the hilt, and we've got this piece, which is made from a 1/2 inch PVC coupler that you just cut in half, and then you sand the outside until it's a nice snug fit in here. A fairly good fit for inside of this as well. So it has become apparent that I'm going to have to cut this crossbar portion of the saber in half, but before we do that, I want to use it as a support for epoxying the crossguard supports on like this. Because we're expecting to play with this fairly roughly, it's really important to rough up the surfaces as much as possible so that we can have a very strong mechanical bond as well as the chemical bond that the glue will be providing. Everything is kind of taped and attached inside of this PVC support sleeve, and we can actually push that in all the way up to where it needs to go, where then it'll be attached in with some screws and everything else. So now that we've wrapped up the wiring, it pretty much wraps up part 2 of the build. Part 3, which is going to be coming soon, is basically going to go over final assembly of the saber, painting and then weathering and distressing it so it looks a little bit closer to Kylo Ren's in the films. If you want to join the Junk Squad and be sure not to miss that video when it comes out, all you got to do is hit that red subscribe button and the bell icon next to it. I really appreciate it, and it does help me out a lot. As always, music, video, social media links down in the description box below. And until next time, stay classy, and I'll see ya in the next one. Okay.